views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I'm Daren, Jaime, and we're glad to have you sharing with us here on the show. If somebody asked the question, what exactly is the Social Justice Forums all about? Well, we bring you a forum that provides a deeper discussion on a lot of the issues, particularly the inequities that many people face, particularly in communities of color. But as you'll see throughout the course of today's show, it's not just about police brutality. There's economic injustice, there's environmental, there's also media, a whole lot of different topics. So we want you to stay tuned. We got a great show coming up ahead for you. The Social Justice Forums starts right now. And welcome back to the show, and we are glad to have you sharing with us. Listen, our very first guest today is a very special guest. He's a successful businessman as well as a brand owner, an entrepreneur, an activist, registered and recognized social media brand marketing influencer, as well as a journalist. He's the founder and CEO of 360 Wise. 360 Wise is an advertising agency that offers national as well as local marketing strategies for nationwide and regional clients. Now, the 360 Wise agency spans into several platforms. There's 360 Wise Media, 360 Wise Network, 360 Wise TV, 360 Wise News, and also 360 Wise Radio. It is also our pleasure right now to be joined by Robert Alexander, who is the CEO of 360 Wise. And Robert, good to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
Hey, listen, let me go first at it. When we talk about media right now, in a critical juncture where we're talking about social unrest, we're talking about the political scene that is going to be ramping up towards November. We talk about the economics. We talk about COVID-19. What does it mean for you to be, first of all, a minority in media and having the platform that you have?
Well, it means a lot, and we have a lot of work to do. Basically, a lot of brainwashing occurs when it comes to national and regular media as we have it. The narrative needs to be controlled by those that have and own their own platforms. And I thank you for being on your show and doing your due diligence to implement change in the environment and speaking up. So thank you for allowing me to be on your platform.
No, I'm glad. And for somebody who's not familiar with 360 Wise, it's a platform that's birthed out of your heart. Talk to us about how 360 Wise came about.
I mean, first, dealing with the music industry and sports industry, from Don King to MC Hammer, looking at verticals in regards to, you know, the news and the media that was coming out. We had Q over there at World Star Hip Hop. And this is right at the birth of the dumbing down. A lot of our people were being dumbed down by navigating to those media of negativity. So we started something called War Star Hip Hop, and it spewed into video and radio interviews with Paul Porter, activist Paul Porter. He was a writer for All Hip Hop. And then spurred into, let's start our own media company, myself and my wife, Tasha. And we just converted from, War Star Hip Hop to 360 Wise. We have to be 360, and we have to be wise in the midst of all that we're doing, turn the negative to positive.
Amazing. And so as we talk about 360 Wise, we know that you just don't have radio. You've got several different brands. So share with us a little bit about the 360 Wise platform and what's going on right now.
Well, currently right now we're stepping into, it's an honor to step into the World of Dance brand. And that's with the CEO, Matthew Everett, and with myself as the Director of Community and Leadership. And as of yesterday, I've stepped onto the board of the Power of One Foundation out of California, Orange County, as the director, assistant director on that brand, and also the director of marketing. They've actually fed over 1 million people in the past 6 months right there on the ground. So 360 Wise, the brand itself, has now integrated into different variables and of people that are actually causing doing change in a massive way for all colors, all cultures, all creeds, and that's always been the goal.
And in the area of social justice, I know obviously you have a particular lens for that because you're able to look at social justice from another perspective in media. When you see the George Floyd situation, when you see Breonna Taylor, when you see Jacob Prude, and you see these individuals who've suffered, I know that there's a certain sentiment that rings out. What rings out for you as a media entrepreneur and one that has his own channel and being able to tell the story?
I mean, it's extremely hard because what a lot of individuals don't see, you know, I'm kind of reserved, so I stay in the background. I stay in the background also along with attorney Ben Crump. So we see a lot of things that are happening that mainstream media does not show unless we capture it and post it on Instagram to try to get individuals involved. And then there's also a lot of muting of our actual content. Everybody's content when they're speaking about social justice gets throttled down. So, being in a social, I mean, I'm actually the president of the Miami SCLC, but, when we go from Black Lives Matter and being pissed off with the fact of how our people are continually being treated by the police at this particular point, it's always happened. Just so happens that the cameras and the handhelds are capturing it right live in the moment.
And I want to talk about being the president because not only with 360 Wise, you talk about the power of one, very busy man. You also are working as the president of the Miami SCLC. And when we talk about the SCLC, that's the movement birthed through Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we know that the work for civil rights and social justice continues to go on. Given the fact that we're seeing voter suppression going on, being the fact that we're seeing voter intimidation going on. Talk to us about the SCLC and the current push to get people out to vote.
Well, I mean, a lot of work in the background. I mean, as I stated, like working with World of Dance, working with the Power of One. The Power of One taps us into entire Latin community. World of Dance taps us into all colors, all cultures, all creeds. And we're speaking about vacuums of individuals that have to question where that vote is. Not so much being on the front end at this particular point. I like to navigate in the back end. So does the Miami SCLC, and create change in that way. I mean, no spotlight. Let's just literally create some change in the back end with these communications and the COVID going on at the same time. You have to still be extremely active and not silent. It's a lot going on that many people don't see.
Yeah. And I think you take great pride in saying, listen, you know what? We do a lot of work behind the scenes. We're not always out front, but the work still gets done. What do you think is one of the most important things that we could be doing in this season, given the fact that we do have this political unrest, given the fact that we have this social unrest, and given the fact that the future right now is uncertain, particularly for people of color?
Well, I mean, after all it's said and done, don't grab the biggest pillow and go to sleep. This happens all the time. This, we get excited when we get down to crunch time. It was crunch time before, any election. And beyond all elections, we need to understand that economically, we've been deprived, education, we've been deprived, and we need to actually pull ourselves up at the same time, stop killing one another, right? Understand that to love one another is the best way that we could, fight the power, like Chuck D says. It's going to start with us, period. We can't keep putting a whole bunch of energy in regards to the folks that, the white sheets is possibly right now the police department, but all of the police aren't bad, right? But there are some bad apples. They got to be shook up. But even in our own neighborhoods, we need to straighten it out a little bit. Like these youngins need to understand that we got a bunch of people that's still in the penitentiary, right? Based on what Bill Clinton and all of them did. But I mean, the crime bills and stuff. They're saying don't come in because they trying to get out here and be part of this revolution that's going on, right?
Right.
So young, that conversation, the OGs need to start talking to the youngins need to understand, like, this ain't time. This is not the time to be out here cutting up for some tennis shoes or some chump change. Tighten up, because they pissed off inside the penitentiary. They trying to come out here.
Well, I think you're speaking to a different narrative, right? I mean, I'm not a different narrative, but a narrative that many people don't focus on, right? And that's the people who are back there behind bars that say, look, brother, don't you come in here, because the reality is I'm trying to get out there to fight with you, but you out there getting into a fight to come in here with me, and you got it all wrong.
That's totally correct. I mean, and again, it's the box mentality. We've got to change them. We've got to change the mindset. We need the elders. I honor what you're doing. I thank you for, and everyone that you know that sees your show and knows about the content that you're creating needs to contribute in sharing it to other individuals. We're in vital times. But again, I must reiterate, this can't be because we're coming up on an election. Like, we're always right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we need to always be right here in regards to surging the energy to amidst change in the environment, amidst change in the community, amidst change within one another. We have more Caucasians out here off the Black Lives Matter and this social justice and stuff than we've ever had, right? So again, we're about to transcend it. If we could think about all colors, all cultures, all creeds, and overstand the ones that are doing this wrong, they're going to get dealt with. We got to be vigilant and watching, from the police to our own people.
Right. Well, how passionate are you as a media influencer to say, listen, I need to influence media from the perspective of what people are actually seeing? Because when we go to your website, we'll see stories that maybe everybody else isn't talking about. We'll see stories coming from another perspective. And that perspective is not always of mainstream media. So as a quote unquote minority in media, give me a little bit about the struggle to really captivate hearts and minds around a different narrative that mainstream media has captured, but you're trying to come from a different perspective.
Well, it's not even a struggle, right? I don't look at it as a struggle. We have our collectives. We actually know how to drive traffic. And we understand that people are looking and they don't want to claim that they're looking, right?
Right.
I think that the issue is more so collectively getting our people to understand that we have this engine that we're trying to help empower, right? Individuals, content creators, individuals that want to create their own media, right? They can come over to 360 Wise. We want to actually help empower them to also generate income and change the narrative. Like, we're 360 Wise. It's all colors, all cultures, all creeds.
Yeah. Well, talk to me about the future. What you got coming up?
And shoot, right now, and again, the Power of One just fell into our lap. It's a definite honor to be sitting on the board as assistant director of the Power of One Foundation, which is in California. They have IKEA as sponsors. They have Waste Management as sponsors. Actually, they just got awarded the 2020 Nonprofit of the Year award from the governor there in California. So I'm very excited in implementing that into what we're doing here in South Florida and moving around the country and making some noise in the back end and just feed people, right? Feed people, feed them mentally, and feed them with nutrition.
Yeah, that's amazing work. The Power of One continues to do in terms of feeding people. And I think that, when we talk about stories and narratives that need to be told, give me this perspective here. When we talk about being fed, or we're talking about eating, hunger is a big thing based on COVID-19. And because there's so many people who are unemployed and also underemployed, that making minimum wage, having a wage is a struggle. And the main issue for a lot of people is this whole issue of food insecurity and being able to eat healthy.
And they're not going to tell us, the mainstream media will not show those statistics on how many people are actually suffering when it comes to economic disparity. It was already economic disparities before the COVID hit. Don't let it, don't let it fool you. So right now,
Don't let the smooth taste fool you.
yeah, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So it's very important, man. There there's so many, that television, that our narrative is, it's what you're doing is so needed. Um, but our people need to tune in to these particular types of conversations that you have, not just with me, but with the entire lineup. Every time you're on Bronx television, every time that I see the post that you put on Facebook, you get me. I mean, and I see the individuals that you surround yourself with, and they need to be all championed, because our people are hungry out here. Uh, and they're hungry for knowledge. They're hungry for salvation, and they're economically disparate from here all the way to the Mexican border.
Yeah. And I think that, feeding people information is a good thing. I mean, we like doing it here, but sometimes feeding that information becomes hard based on the mass information that's being produced in other places that people kind of like fall prey to. And so you fall to to the mainstream, and you take that as being the golden narrative. But what I love about, what we do, and what yourself and others continue to do, is we say, listen, don't focus necessarily on that story, because that story is a story, but there's also a story behind the story. And that's the story that we want to be able to capture. And that's the story that we want to be able to bring out to people so they can be able to understand, listen, there's more to it. And I'll use my word. There's more perspectives than just what you are seeing right now. And I think that's the game changer, don't you?
Oh, it's definitely the game changer, and I speak it personally myself and our company through about 75% of the online media outlets of individuals on celebrity and public figure status. That is our conversation, and we actually are behind a high percentage of it. But again, when you have algorithms that are changing, like in Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, which are not for the beneficial factor of people of color and those that are speaking about change, that's something that needs to be spoken about continuously. So individuals need
Hold
to
on, don't go anywhere. Stay right there. No, no, no. I mean, we got a few seconds, but break that down, because I think so many people don't get it, and I think so many people have been twisted by Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I'll say, like we've been saying throughout the course of the segment, don't fall for the smooth taste. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, let me just put it to you like this. There are influencers that will speak to you, and they're quote unquote called influencers that tell you to go to Instagram, go to Facebook, woo, 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 because this is how they do it. But they got stock in them joints. They got stock in those companies, right? And then you got 100,000 followers on. Okay, let's get real basic on Facebook. Let's just say the real basic person. The real basic person has 30 friends on Facebook, but they only get, like, only one person sees their posts, right? That's because you're a lead. The social part of this died years ago. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, these are lead platforms. You're a lead, meaning the time that you're spending on there is creating a lead for someone or a company like us that's fishing for someone to buy. And as soon as our individuals understand that putting free content in a lead based platform is not beneficial for them economically, which is their time is money, and mentally, because they're in a clouded trap. You get me? Things will change. Becoming an entrepreneur, becoming business minded. I mean, we went from the corner, right, and the schoolyard to just hanging online, and people becoming online, but they're not actually in reality. But right now, 90% of all of y'all on your leads. You're a lead. Just think about it. If you say I am a lead, and then say I don't want to be a lead, then you start controlling your content and start looking at platforms like 360 Wise Media and others like what's the brother on Facebook? You know,
Roland Martin.
Roland Martin. You know what I mean? The list goes on and on. He's utilizing that platform as a lead-based system. You get
Right.
me? As long as that's all he's utilizing it for, because if they turn the switch, it's a wrap. You get me? We need to think in that mind frame.
Yeah, it's a lot to do. So listen, we're about to end the segment, but before we do, got to bring you back. But before we do, talk to us a little bit about how people can get connected to 360 Wise going forward.
Well, all you need to do is just Google 360 Wise, 360 WISE, or you can call us at 1-844-360 Wise. And you know, we're in your top 1% social media, brand advertisement, marketing, television. If you want to get your show on, if you have premium content, we don't want any of the dumbing down stuff. There's enough platforms and rooms and spaces for that. Again, call 1-844-360-WISE or just go to 360wise.com.
Robert Alexander of 360 Wise TV, thank you for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums. Look, don't go anywhere. We've got more show coming up after this. We're going to talk about environmental justice. That's coming up next here on the Social Justice Forum.
It looks bleak. It feels bleak. But the city isn't shut down because our public services keep working. In spite of, and in the face of, the dangers, we can count on them. And to keep them working and funded now and in the future, we need to be counted. Self-respond now to the 2020 census at my2020census.gov.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from BronxNet,
and welcome back. The Natural Areas Conservancy is a not-for-profit organization that's actually dedicated to preserving New York City's 20,000 acres of forests and wetlands and promoting nature's diversity and resiliency across New York City's 5 boroughs. The NAC released the first comprehensive report on New York City's carbon budget for its forested natural areas. The report is the first of its rigorous calculation of the amount of carbon stored in urban forested natural areas using field collection data. Joining us to provide their point of view on the matter, I'm joined by the conservation scientist and deputy director of conservation science at Natural Areas Conservancy, Clara Pregitzer, and thank you so much for being with us.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And so, as we said, this report in itself is like the first. And so give us a little bit about the report and what exactly it means.
Sure. So, as you said, our organization really focuses on protecting and preserving natural areas. And one of the ways we view forests is for their ecosystem values. So trees provide a lot of benefits, but one of the benefits that they provide is storing and sequestering carbon. And so that had never been calculated in a rigorous way in New York City. And so our organization sort of took that on. And this report sort of highlights the importance of natural areas in one of the ways that trees are important, and that's in storing and sequestering carbon. And so we sort of break that down by the numbers and describe the importance of forests in that way.
And so let me cut in and ask the question a little bit about the importance of urban forests, particularly, across New York City. We talked about the amount of acreage that is dedicated, but the importance of urban forests.
Yeah, so forests are very important for a lot of different reasons. I think there's a lot of social benefits. So I think, we can think about this pandemic, and just visiting the woods and spending time in nature can, make you feel more calm, being able to see wildlife in the city. And the Bronx has over 2,000 acres of forest, and some of the nicest forest in the city is found in the Bronx. And so there's a lot of those social benefits, but then the benefits, I think, when we think about climate change and emissions from fossil fuels, trees are this really, really cool sort of natural sponge for carbon. And so they take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and then store it in their leaves and wood, and then release oxygen back into the atmosphere. And so ensuring that we have our healthy forests for the future. And so so that assessment of the native canopy, but the non-native understory kind of shows that the trajectory of the forest, or the future of the forest, might not be as healthy in the future. And so we've really got to think about ways to protect that forest for the future, and ensure that we're not just storing carbon, but providing important wildlife, the cooling benefits that we see of forests. And so yeah, the work that our organization has done is really looked at the condition of the forest and what it might look like in the future.
Yeah. And so we have the show, it's called the Social Justice Forum, right? And so I talk to people about environmental justice, which is also a part of social justice as well. But give us a little bit about your perspective on really dealing with this matter, because to some people, they may not be so familiar, but the effects are far reaching.
Yeah, so I think one of the things our organization really focuses on is forests across the entire city, so across all 5 boroughs. And a lot of natural areas are found in the Bronx, Staten Island, Queens. And so I think ensuring that we have healthy forests for everybody to explore and experience, is something our city should really focus on, and ensuring that we're providing resources to take care of these forests for the future across the whole city is also critically important. And so no matter the borough that you're living in, or sort of what neighborhood you are in the city, I think having access to a healthy forest is something that we could strive for.
As I was preparing for talking to you, one of the notes that stuck out for me was about forested natural areas. And I was taken aback a little bit by the fact that forest natural areas actually store 3 times more carbon than all of New York City's street trees.
Yeah. So I think when you think about natural areas or forested natural areas, they're concentrations of a lot of trees. And so forested natural areas account for just 1/4 of the tree canopy in New York City. So when you think about all the trees that exist in New York City, and getting sort of a bird's eye view of what that looks like from above, one of the ways we measure the amount of forest or the amount of tree cover we have is by these maps of tree canopy. And natural areas are a minority, so they're just 1/4, but they store the majority of carbon for the whole city. And for street trees, they store 3 times as much carbon as the whole street tree population. And so the street trees, are widespread across the whole city. You can see them on the street, but they're really cared for in a really different way, and they have really different benefits and than natural areas. And so they're both important, but if you think about having a tree on your street or sidewalk, it's so valuable for shade, for cooling your house maybe, but that's really different than taking a walk in the woods or having a place to kind of look up at the tree canopy. And so, so I think there's a little over 600,000 street trees in New York City, but there's over 5 million trees in natural areas. So when you think about carbon stored, these natural areas are really, you're getting a lot of bang for your buck in terms of carbon storage.
What can the public do in order to make the situation better?
Yeah, so I think understanding a little bit about the sort of where the natural areas are in your neighborhood. So starting with just exploring your neighborhood and exploring the parks in the city. And then there's a lot of opportunities to volunteer to help take care of the forest. So the Natural Areas Conservancy, as well as New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, hosts volunteer events, and when it's safe to do so, you know, coming together and planting trees or removing invasive species is something that that we would love to have people take a part in. But I think, you know, just enjoying the parks and enjoying the natural areas and communicating with people about their importance is also something that people can do.
Yeah, we've heard a lot, you know, recently in news about how forests could possibly be a part of a solution, if you will, towards climate change. I know a lot of people don't agree with that. I just want to get your thoughts on that, because when we hear that, you know, forests and, you know, the expendability and climate change, what are your thoughts that come to mind?
Yeah, so I think, you know, natural climate solutions or forests as a solution or planting trees as a solution definitely is important, but of course that's not the only solution. And so when we think about the ways that we need to address climate change, we really need to come at it with a lot of different approaches and have sort of a diverse portfolio in terms of tackling this huge problem. And so I think planting trees and taking care of our existing forests is something we 100% should do, but that doesn't you know, that doesn't take care of reducing transportation emissions or you know, thinking about new alternative ways for energy. So I think there's, you know, a lot of different approaches that are needed, and you can kind of view nature-based solutions or planting trees or taking care of our forests as one of the many ways in which we can help tackle or address the problem of climate change.
Yeah, and there is a fight for climate change all across, you know, all across the United States, more particularly here in New York City. What are you hearing? What are you seeing in regards to that fight?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, I guess I feel like there's a lot of, I guess I'm not sure I know exactly how to answer that question. Maybe I'll say that I think there's, you know, we can look at green space solutions. We can look at the things that the city could potentially do. I think looking ahead at, you know, potentially the next mayoral race or the ways in which, you know, our city tackles climate change and really situating natural areas as a part of that solution. I think our report on this carbon budget, I think, sort of captures for the first time the value that natural areas in New York City and the value that they have and the potential role that they could play. So ensuring that we can sort of situate the best available science and information into policy solutions is something I think we should be looking ahead towards. But I think, you know, there's a lot of climate change challenges that the city will face, including sea level rise, and focusing on ensuring we have healthy coastal wetlands, I think is another approach. And then I think kind of looking at our transportation and the many ways that our city sort of views energy as well could be important too. But yeah, our work really focuses on natural areas, and so I think my answer is a little bit weighted towards natural solutions.
Totally understood, though. Totally understood there. Let me go back to your report for a minute and talk a little bit about some of your findings. What were some of the key things that stuck out in your report that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think the fact that we found that natural areas in New York City are storing and sequestering carbon at the same rate as rural forests. So when you look at sort of on a per unit basis, the forests in New York City are functioning in a very similar way than you might see forests functioning in the Adirondacks or the Catskills. And so I think highlighting the fact that we have healthy and high functioning forests right here in New York City, and we need to take care of them. Another thing I think we found in our report is that we have healthy forests that are storing a lot of carbon, and then we have really degraded forests, our non-native vinelands that are not storing as much carbon. And so the fact that we really need to focus on managing and protecting our existing forests and moving it on a trajectory towards healthy forests. So looking at our the natural resource of forests in New York City as a whole, and thinking about how can we ensure that we're managing and protecting these lands to be resources for the whole city, but also providing as much benefit as they possibly can. And then I think, you know, the fact that we found that just in a quarter of the tree canopy, we have most of the carbon being stored in New York City, I think that provides a new way to look at natural areas and sort of view this resource as incredibly important for climate change and climate policy. But, you know, there's a lot of different green spaces in New York City.
And for an average person who may be a novice, right, how do you define what's called a quote unquote healthy forest?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of ways that a lot of different metrics that you can think about, but thinking about the species that exist there. So here in New York City, we have a lot of different forest types because we're right in between the Mid-Atlantic and New England ecoregions. So, and we're a coastal city, and so we have a wide variety of native plants here. So having native plants in our forest is something we look at as being a healthy element of the forest. And the reason being is that these plants are situated and adapted to living here in New York City, and they provide a lot of habitat for many plants and animals. But it's not just about the species, it's also about the forest structure. And so thinking about having a lot of different sizes of trees, so having really big trees in the canopy, but also having small tree seedlings that are regenerating, that's an indicator of a healthy forest because it ensures that that forest could be self-sustaining. And so those are some of the things we look for when we think about a healthy forest.
Yeah. And so for people who want to find out more information about your report and the work that you've done, how do they go about doing that?
Our report is on our website, so you can go to www.naturalareas.nyc.org, and we have all of the full report as well as a one-page summary, or I think it's a two-page summary that describes our main findings.
And for you, I want to ask the question also. We talk to everybody on the show and ask them about how does COVID-19 actually impact the work that you do? And so can you share with us a little bit about maybe how COVID-19 has impacted the work that you're doing right now?
Yeah, sure. So, well, for one, we're not in our offices, as I think, you know, most of, or many people in New York City are not in their offices. So I think there's a lot sort of missing from our just sort of office interactions, but we've adapted, I think, really well to that. But another project that I work on is managing a program called the Forest and Cities Program. And so we are bringing together a group of practitioners and leaders that focus on the science and management of forests in 12 cities across the US. And one of the things we did this summer, which was different because of COVID, was we asked them about COVID. So we conducted a survey about how has COVID impacted the work of natural areas in cities across the US. And for ourselves too, one thing we found is that more people are visiting natural areas in cities because if you're in an apartment all day, you want to get outside, and a good place to do that is in your public park. And so we've really tried to raise some awareness about the importance of natural areas and ensuring that we have funding to take care of them. I think the fact that city budgets are being cut, not just in New York City for park care, but in cities across the US, that kind of ensuring that we fight for this resource and the protection of this resource for the future is something we've shifted towards now that we're in this COVID world.
Yeah, we're all navigating. We're just trying to do the best job that we possibly can. Clara, we got to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us here on the Social Justice Forums.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
All righty, and listen, we want you to stay connected to us. Guess what? We're going to take a quick break. We got more show when we return coming up right after this.
When taking public transportation, don't touch your phone. Carry hand sanitizer and use it immediately upon leaving the bus or train. Avoid touching your face. If someone is coughing or sneezing, move away. Wash your hands with soap and water as soon as possible. Limit contact with poles. If possible, avoid rush hour. Don't eat or drink on public transportation. Keep your bag off the floor or other surfaces. Avoid directly touching turnstiles. Stay up to date with the latest from your local health department and CDC.
Who's most at risk for coronavirus? People over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk? Avoid close contact with people. Avoid crowds. Stay home if you can. Wash your hands frequently. Learn more ways to protect yourself and others at coronavirus.gov.
Hi, I'm Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr., and I'm making sure that the Bronx counts is my priority. That's why I'm urging everyone to fill out the 2020 census. The 2020 census is important because it would allow for the federal government to determine how much money and resources the Bronx is going to need for the next 10 years around healthcare, education, housing, roads, representation, and so many other things. Now let's all get together and make the Bronx count.
And welcome back. The New York City Human Service organizations often rely on city contracts to operate, but have long complained those contracts don't cover enough of their overhead costs. Addressing those concerns, the city funded an initiative last year to cover more of these indirect costs for not-for-profits. Now, the Indirect Cost Rate Initiative promised to cover indirect costs exceeding 10% of a city contract for organizations retroactively. But in the middle of the initiative's implementation, Mayor Bill de Blasio also approved a budget this summer, slashing funds from the initiative across various city agencies. And so that's caused a cause of concern. Here now to share a little bit more and joining us to talk about this point of view, we're joined by the policy analyst at United Neighborhood Houses, JT Falcone. And JT, good to have you back.
Glad to be back. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to talking about indirect with you today.
Yeah, so listen, let me do this first of all. For our viewers who are watching, right, somebody may not be so familiar with what indirect costs actually are and how this whole thing plays out. So let's give them a little bit of an understanding as to what indirect costs really are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think indirect, you could accurately describe it as some of the magic that keeps nonprofits operating and running all of the programs that are externally facing that are recognizable to communities. So in order for nonprofits to run senior centers, to run food pantries, to operate early childhood education and all of the great services that they provide, there are certain business expenses that are related to that: payroll, administrative expenses, organizational expenses around different other than personnel costs. So if you take the contract, it's divided up into the personnel costs, the costs that are going to the salaries of folks, and then it's going to the service costs. So if there's food being purchased for a food pantry, or if there are activities being delivered directly to senior citizens in senior centers, say. And then what's left is the indirect. And part of what makes this a challenging advocacy endeavor is that basically what we're saying is it's all the stuff that you're not seeing that's happening behind the scenes that lets the things that you are seeing happen. So if there's a way to condense that into a soundbite, I invite your feedback, but that's the elevator pitch, assuming we're going up to the 100th floor.
Yeah, no, I think you did it best, and you did it better than I could. So when we talk about indirect costs, though, how is it coming with regards to contracts? I talked a little bit in the beginning about the indirect costs and the 10% as regards to the city contracts. Walk us through where we are today.
Right. So, like you said, last year, the mayor and the speaker made an announcement that they had come to an agreement that they were going to retroactive for all of fiscal year 20, which was the past budget. And then it would be completed and set in stone going forward for fiscal year 21, which is the upcoming year, right?
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is that because of some of the financial challenges that the city's facing, they've been going through and looking for cuts. And they decided that taking it out on the nonprofits is a really viable solution. Something that they tend to do often is taking money from nonprofit contracts and budgets. So they decided that retroactively they were going to take back the adjustments for fiscal year 20. So what that means, I mean, for 6 settlement houses in the Bronx that I've been in communication with, the average retroactive budget cut that they've taken, so this is money that they've already spent on based on a promise from the city, is about $325,000. So that's really tough, especially in these times. And then on top of that, the money that's potentially at risk for these 6 organizations on average in fiscal year 21 is about $1.4 million each. So not only are we looking at a retroactive budget cut for money that's already been spent, but we're also looking at financial uncertainty for the coming year. So it's really a double down situation for nonprofits who are concerned about what the consequences of this might be.
Well, I want to say this, that when you talk about not-for-profits, certainly a lot of people have growing concerns, given the fact that not-for-profits, as well as everybody, has been hugely impacted by what's going on with COVID-19. Nobody will deny that COVID-19 will have a huge financial impact against businesses, and we've already seen it, in the city and across the state. From a not-for-profit perspective, give us what this actually means, because, when we talk about the economic impact, some people say, well, listen, you're only talking about indirect costs. It's not really that much we're talking about, but in the lives of these not-for-profits, this is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the way that indirect is seeped into all of the activities of an organization, it means that each organization will manifest their challenges to the cuts in different ways, right? So based on the conversations we're having with settlement houses in the Bronx and across the city, some folks are looking at potential layoffs, particularly for administrative staff, the staff that's on the back end, making sure that everything runs smoothly. Some folks are looking at different ways that they can pull back some investments in programming so that they could maybe maintain the same programming level, but decrease quality a bit so that they can at least continue to serve the same number of folks. And other folks are thinking about ways that they might have to pull back from programs in terms of the number served. So it manifests differently across the board. And the trick is, if you're looking at someone, say, on payroll staff, right, who helps make the organization run smoothly, who's potentially partially funded their salary by this indirect money, it's not just the city contracts, it's not just specific city contracts that this person is necessarily working on, right? Their work might be spread across several different contracts. And so really the way that it pops up is very, very different organization by organization. But ultimately what we can say for sure is when the city pulls back this money, it's a direct blow to frontline workers at the end of the day. The city's already gone back on its promise to fully fund. The indirect, the city has gone back and forth, as we discussed last time I was on, with funding around summer youth. And it's the people who work on the front lines, the people that have been showing up for their communities throughout the course of this pandemic, who are suffering from the back and forth and all the flip-flopping.
Yeah. So where we go from here? I mean, obviously there's some advocacy that's being done. The voices are being raised, a lot of community concern. And then on top of that, I know the community has been engaged and involved. You also have not-for-profits who are actually raising their voices. So where are we seeing this fight and this advocacy going right now?
Right. Well, in the immediate term, we're looking. The city's budget has a pre-established modification term that comes up in November. So we're looking at that November budget mod as our window of opportunity to address the fact that this initiative wasn't fully funded in some of these retroactive budget cuts. So that seems like it's a possible opportunity for us at the very least, to receive some sort of assurance for what funding levels organizations can expect in fiscal year 21. Because it's one thing to not get the money, it's another to have been promised the money and have it taken out of your hands, right? So we want to figure out exactly what the lay of the land will be in that November budget mod. And I think across nonprofit, across all of city services, we're going to see, I would anticipate a very challenging modification because we continue to not receive support from the federal government in the form of some sort of stimulus, and we continue to see challenges with funding from the federal, state, and city level as a result of the trickle down for the way those funds work, right? So looking into November, we're going to be pushing hard so that we can get clear answers. We'll be pushing hard for the mayor to keep his promise. I mean, in his own words last year when he announced the initiative, the mayor called these necessary resources to ensure that health organizations can continue to deliver services for New Yorkers for generations to come. So he understands how critical these funds are, and we want to put the spotlight on the fact that he's flip-flopping here to attempt to get him to write this and keep his promise to nonprofits. Short of that, I mean, I think we'll continue to do what we do best at United Neighborhood Houses. We're a membership organization for settlement houses that works in coalition with advocacy partners. So making sure that we're stopping in across the news organizations at the city, and thank you for having us here so we can talk about it, just so that everyday New Yorkers who maybe aren't as involved in the intricacies of nonprofit budgets, which is probably most of us, start to understand just how these decisions might consequence and ripple out into the communities and affect services.
Yeah, but now tell me, what would you say to critics, right? Because somebody else said, listen, we've had COVID-19. We know the city's been economically impacted. We know the state's been economically impacted. We know that cuts have to come. They just got to come. And we're anticipating that things are going to be tight. So to some people, they'll say, this is no surprise. And these cuts are, just a part of what goes on. How would you answer them?
I think there's two answers. One is a promise is a promise is a promise, right? So in an instance where the city made a promise to nonprofits, the fact that they went back on that and acted as a fair weather friend to their contractors and the folks who are delivering essential services is pretty egregious. But more importantly, I think when we think about cuts to a city budget, a budget is ultimately a statement of priorities, and it's a complex one, and it's formulated in Excel, and a lot of folks shirk back at the idea of diving deep into those numbers. But the way that these budget cuts impact New Yorkers is not necessarily the same across the board, right? Who is being asked to bear the most cuts, right? And we see time and again that it's low-income communities of color that are asked to bear and shoulder these budget cuts. And this is an example of that. I mean, it's a direct blow to communities of color that rely on these services, and it's a direct blow to the primarily women of color workforce of the human services organizations, right? Yeah. So I think when we talk about the fact that cuts are inevitable, we're facing a tough budget and everyone's gonna have to tighten their belts, I don't think that there's anybody out there that that could pragmatically disagree with those points. But what we're saying is that there's a lens through which we could approach this much more equitably and see these cuts shouldered by all New Yorkers. And that's what we're pushing for at the end of the day.
Talk to me about the weight, because there's a heavy weight in dealing with this, right? Because as a not-for-profit, I know that every budget year, when we deal with the state budgets, not-for-profits are always cringing. And then also, you got city budgets, and not-for-profits are cringing. And so how effective, if the word I could just use, or how much does this, really give you or come against your effectiveness when you've got to always contend against these things and still be able to go forward, still be able to put forth programming, still be able to do what you have to do, and then have to have this always hanging and looming in the backdrop?
Well, I gotta say, I truly hope that the mayor is a regular viewer of BronxNet here, because that's exactly the question on everybody's mind. And I think it's one that he's not necessarily thinking about, is the opportunity cost, right? These settlement houses and human service organizations, at the end of the day, are going to be absolutely integral to the city's recovery, right? We've seen the federal government send everybody a check for $1,200 a few months back. That is if they qualified and if they were a citizen, right, with document status. That's it, right? Everybody else has sort of been left on their own, and the state has been pushing an eviction moratorium back month by month. as we see the other shoe drop on that eviction moratorium when it is lifted, as we see the real consequences of people's loss of income, of businesses' loss of income, nonprofits are the only organizations that are out there holding the hands with the community, working in the community, and making sure that people have access to the bare necessities that they need to weather through those times. So I think the opportunity cost is really a great frame for it, because when organizations spend all of their time bouncing back and forth between promises that are made and then broken, when they have to spend all of this time advocating for the city to come through on the things that it said it was going to do, that means that they're not spending all of those hours and all of that person power focused on the quality of services, right? But just imagine a world where the nonprofit community could take the city's word as a promise and operate off of that and continue serving their communities without having to worry about whether at the end of the day the city is actually going to pay up on their contracts and how long it's going to take. I mean, the other just small point that I'll make is that in many instances, nonprofits are just that, right? They don't have profits. They don't have a bank account sitting there with growing interest. They're not invested. They don't have endowments. So in an instance where a nonprofit is literally waiting on payment, which is a whole nother issue, but has payment, it's confirmed, it's supposed to be coming through, but the city takes weeks or months for it to come through, then there's actually a dollar amount cost for waiting on that payment as well, because they're taking out loans to cover payroll and make sure that they can continue programming. So in a literal sense, there's the waiting for the payment, for the check to be in your hand. And in the figurative sense, there's this opportunity cost of having to wait before you can take the city's promises and act on them, right?
Mm-hmm. And talk to me about repayment, because as you're talking about having to sometimes take those loans out or put that extra money out, how often does that occur? And and what does that look like in terms of possible cost or numbers?
Yeah, so the Human Service Council did a really interesting report. What would it have been, about 5 or 6 years back when FEGS collapsed in the Bronx, and it caused a real reckoning for the human services field. Human Services Council put out a report that looked into this and saw that a great number, I don't want to quote numbers off the top of my head, and I don't have them in front of me, but I remember it was maybe as many as 1/5 of the human service organizations in New York City were operating on the brink of insolvency. And a lot of it does have to do with payment delays and challenges with contracts. I think this is something that we've seen the city paying more and more attention to, but especially in the transition to remote, when everybody was doing their job in a way, especially at the peak of the pandemic, when everybody was doing their job in a way that was different than they had done it before, right, from home on their computers, there were a lot of challenges getting money. I think right now we're primarily struggling with payment from the state. So the city has been doing an all right job getting payments out the door. But if it's not one thing, it's another. That's kind of life in the shoes of a human service organization in New York City these days.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, JT, but thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about indirect costs. Certainly want to keep our viewers up to speed, and got to bring you back so that way you can keep us further updated.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really enjoying coming and talking to you, and I look forward to coming back again soon.
All right, JT Falcone, our guest here on the Social Justice Forum. Well, we come to the end of our show today. We're wrapping things up, but we hope that you enjoyed this week's discussion as we talked about a variety of issues that pertain to social justice. And when we talked about social justice, sometimes people think it's just about police brutality or mass incarceration, but it extends in so many other different ways. But thank you for being here with us today. Of course, we want to bring you a great show next week. Catch the Recablecast as well here on BronxNet Channel 67 and Verizon Files Channel 2133. And always, if you want to put your point of view, don't hesitate to get to our social media pages at BronxNet TV. That about ends the Social Justice Forums. I'm Daren Jaime. Take care, and God bless.